against the holy covenant, so shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. Everyone know what that is, what that represents? If you can explain that to a non-Adventist this evening, raise your hand. If you had to explain that to a non-Adventist this evening, you know what you could do? You could grab the book, Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith, and take it with you on the study, because he tells you what the verse represents. And that's God's helping hand. Okay, this is pagan Rome. This is the end of the story of pagan Rome. In verse 30, the last phrase, pagan Rome is having intelligence with the papacy. The papacy is the power in Bible prophecy that forsook the Holy Covenant. The papacy is the church that Paul speaks about. He says, there will be a falling away first. They fell away from the Holy Covenant. This is the papacy. In verse 30, pagan Rome begins a dialogue with the papacy. And then verse 31, from this point on, it's speaking about the papacy. And it says this, "An arm shall stand on his part." Military strength is going to stand up for the papacy. "And they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the" what? Okay, my brothers and sisters, when the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 become present truth, when the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 begin to be fulfilled in history, Ellen White has just told us that verses 30 to 36, scenes similar to those described in verses 30 to 36 will take place in the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. And part of the scenes in verses 30 to 36 has to do with the taking away of the daily. So when the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 begin to be fulfilled at the end of the world, it is important to have the correct view of the daily. Wasn't so important before verse 40 was fulfilled in 1989, but now, if you're going to have the right pattern, you best be straight on what the daily represents. Notice the next quote from the Spirit of Prophecy. "The time has come when through God's messengers the scroll is being unrolled to the world. Instructors in our schools should never be bound about by being told that they are to teach only what has been taught hitherto. Away with these restrictions. There is a God to give the message his people shall speak. Let not any minister feel under bonds or be gauged by men's measurement. The gospel must be fulfilled in accordance with the message he sends." Now notice this last sentence. "That which God gives his servants to speak today would not perhaps have been present truth 20 years ago, but it is God's message for this time." Okay, the daily was not present truth in the early part of the 20th century because the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 were not being fulfilled. They are now being fulfilled, and the pattern for these verses includes the history of the daily. It is now present truth. We must understand it correctly in order to have the correct sequence of events in the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. Next page. Go to Daniel 11. In verse 40, we've looked at the fact that the papacy is conquering the Soviet Union. Okay? Verse 41 says, "He shall enter also into the glorious land." If you take the Hebrew, if you look at the Hebrew here, the he is the king of the north. It's the papacy. And this phrase, "shall enter also," you know what it means? What's it mean? You're not paying attention. I'm going through your notes. In the first part of verse 41 where it says, "He, the king of the north, shall enter also," what does it mean? In like manner. He will enter the glorious land in like manner as he just swept away the Soviet Union. How did he sweep away the Soviet Union? With economic and military strength. Okay, so if you think the glorious land is the Seventh-day Adventist Church, then you think that the papacy is going to conquer the Seventh-day Adventist Church through economic and military power, in spite of the fact that the Bible tells us the gates of hell will not prevail against his church, and in spite of the fact that Sister White says the church may appear to fall, but it does not fall. It remains, while the sinners in Zion are removed. You're standing in opposition to the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy if you think that the papacy conquers the Seventh-day Adventist Church. No, this is talking about the army that comes with the papacy. But in any case, that's another argument about the glorious land. So he shall also enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. Okay, glorious on page 32 we've already dealt with. It means in sense of prominence. This is the most prominent land in the world. It's the United States. We've looked at the quote under Daniel 11:16, when Daniel uses the glorious land in verse 16 of Daniel 11. Uriah Smith informs us it's talking about the land of Palestine. When Daniel uses the phrase glorious land, he's talking about a geographical area. He's not talking about God's church. Sister White says in Maranatha 193, the Lord has done more for the United States than any other country upon which the sun shines. Here he provided an asylum for his people where they could worship him according to the dictates of conscience. Here Christianity has progressed in its purity. The life-giving doctrine of one mediator between God and man has been freely taught. Now notice notice the emphasis that I've supplied there on this one word that's repeated twice. It said God designed. God designed that this country should ever remain free for all people to worship him in accordance with the dictates of conscience. He designed that its civil institutions in their expansive production should represent the freedom of gospel privileges. God designed the United States of America to fulfill a specific purpose. It's not just a country that just happens to providentially be there. It was designed by God. You see that? It's a glorious land. Overthrown. Who's overthrown? Brothers and sisters, the only people that can be overthrown when the Sunday law arrives in the United States are people that are going to be held accountable for the light of Sabbath and Sunday. Who is it that has the light on Sabbath and Sunday? Seventh-day Adventists. Those Protestant Christians outside of Adventism, when the Sunday law arrives, Sister White's clear. They don't receive the mark of the beast until the issue between Sabbath and Sunday is explained to them. So when the King of the North conquers the United States at the Sunday law, those people that are overthrown are Seventh-day Adventists that have prepared a character for the mark of the beast instead of preparing a character for the seal of God. Notice what she says. When the law of God is being made void, the church will be sifted by fiery trials, and a smaller portion than we now anticipate. A larger portion than we now anticipate will give heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devil. A larger portion. How many of Seventh-day Adventists today, brothers and sisters, when you look around Adventism today, how many do you think, what percentage of Adventism do you think is preparing for the seal of God? In the context of Noah. I mean, how many prepared to get on the ark? How many people got out of Sodom and Gomorrah? How many people came into the promised land from Egypt? 2. So, a larger portion than we now anticipate are going to receive the mark of the beast. Whoa. Now, that's fearful. Is it not fearful? Okay. That's why Sister White says we have the most fearful message ever given to mankind. And she doesn't mean reverence. She means fearful. Now, when they were dancing around the golden calf? Yeah. What were they? What were they, though? When they were dancing, what were they? They were naked. Okay, so who is naked? Laodiceans. Poor, blind, and naked. Okay, what were they worshiping? They were worshiping the golden calf, but what was the golden calf? Was it a real calf? No, it was an image of the calf. It was image of the beast. They were worshiping the image of the beast. And what was their punishment? He ground up the image of the beast, didn't he? And put it in water, and they had to drink it. What happens to those people that receive the mark of the beast in the third angel in Revelation 14? They drink the wrath of God that's poured out without mixture from the cup of his indignation. Okay? When they came out of Egypt and danced around the golden calf, that's a Sunday law. And those people that are dancing are Laodiceans that are naked, poor, blind, and miserable. That's the larger portion of Adventism than we now anticipate, that give heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils that she's speaking about here. The great issue near at hand will weed out those whom God has not appointed, and he will have a pure, sanctified ministry prepared for the latter rain. As the storm approaches, a large class who have professed faith in the third angel's message but have not been sanctified through obedience to the truth. If we found the trend that I just outlined, yep. Many are called, but few are chosen. Millerite history is repeated to the very letter, and on October 21st, 1844, they estimate there were 50,000 Millerites, and on October 23rd, there was 50. That's a 1,000-to-1 ratio. That's just historical. I don't know that there's an actual head count, but that's the rough historical analysis. Is that not how we understand it as Seventh-day Adventists, that many are called, but few are chosen? I'm not trying to put a mathematical calculation, if that's what you're thinking I'm doing. I'm saying that the majority of Adventism is not preparing for the great issue that's near at hand. Is that not how you understand it?
Well, here the text of Revelation where the angels showed John, the people going to him, and they were at the scene.
They were what? Yeah. Yeah, but that's an amount that's developed from Adam onward, right? Yes. All the redeemed put together, probably, this will get me in trouble perhaps, but I mean, they're going to replace the angels that left heaven, right? So there's a lot of redeemed. But in each of these histories, these sacred histories that illustrate the end of the world, part of the story is that there are many that are called, but only a few are chosen. I think that's consistent in the Scriptures. Anyway, let each man be fully persuaded in his own mind. At the Sunday law, a larger portion than we now anticipate are going to give heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devil. I'm going to move to page 33. And I have to quit at 555. Okay. Notice on when and then. The reason I have when and then, if you haven't noticed it before, in the Spirit of Prophecy, Sister White uses the word when and then in a prophetic way. And if you force yourself to watch for it, you'll see many, 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 many times that Sister White says, when this happens, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens, then this will happen. And if you watch for Sister White's when and then, it'll bring clarity into many different things, because she does it many times. Okay, when and then. And this is one of them. When the law of God is being made void, when his name is dishonored, when it is considered disloyal to the laws of the land to keep the seventh-day Sabbath, when wolves in sheep's clothing through blindness of mind and hardness of heart are seeking to compel the conscience, shall we give up our loyalty to God? No, no. The wrongdoer is filled with a satanic hatred against those who are loyal to the commandments of God, but the value of God's law as a rule of conduct must be made manifest. The zeal of those who obey the Lord will be increased.